Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Sunday, March 22, 2026.
I want you to visualize a map of the Middle East for a second.
Okay.
Now put your finger on Tehran, and I want you to draw a circle with a 4,000-kilometer radius, and just look at what falls inside that ring.
That's a massive area.
Right. You are suddenly encompassing half of the European continent. You're sweeping deep into the African mainland. And most chillingly, you are covering deep ocean, highly secure logistical installations.
Installations that the West basically assumed were untouchable.
Exactly. I mean, mathematically untouchable. But today, for the very first time in modern warfare, an active conflict in the Middle East has seen the operational successful use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles, IRBMs, striking across that exact distance.
Wow.
We are not talking about regional border skirmishes anymore. We are watching the real-time obliteration of the geographic limits of power projection. The tectonic plates of global security have just ruptured.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this right now, consider this your official invitation to just pull up a chair and join us in the war room.
Absolutely.
You are the third analyst at this table today, and we desperately need to parse the profound, frankly dizzying global implications of a conflict that it's rewriting the rules of military engagement, economics, and diplomacy hour by hour.
It's changing so fast.
Right, because right now the sheer volume of contradictory information pouring out of Washington is enough to give anyone whiplash. The rhetoric does not match the data, and the data does not match the physical reality on the ground.
It's a complete disconnect.
I mean, I want to start by looking at the timeline of the last 48 hours. Let me lay out the raw text here.
Go for it.
So on Saturday evening, at exactly 7:44 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, President Donald Trump issued a statement on his Truth Social platform. And the specific wording here is critical.
Extremely critical.
He issued an ultimatum threatening to, quote, hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first, unquote. And that's if Iran does not fully open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours.
It is just a staggering public escalation.
Yeah.
But you cannot view that 7:44 p.m. statement in a vacuum. You really have to place it side by side with the official administration briefings from that exact same day.
And that is the part that is breaking my brain. Just hours before that post, and then in several subsequent briefings, the administration has been forcefully claiming that Operation Epic Fury, this massive military campaign, is essentially winding down.
Right.
They laid out 5 core objectives that they claim are either completed or in the final mop-up phase. Those objectives explicitly include the complete degradation of Iran's missile launch capability.
That is huge.
The destruction of its defense industrial base, and the systemic elimination of its Navy and Air Force. So let me challenge the logic here, because how do you square that circle?
You don't.
I mean, if you have achieved total military victory, if the enemy's Navy is at the bottom of the sea and their missile silos are smoking craters, why are you issuing a desperate 48-hour public ultimatum to beg them to open a waterway?
Exactly, you just don't. And that is what military analyst Daniel Davis and geopolitical analyst Chris Norland are calling the ultimate paradox of victory.
The paradox of victory.
Yeah, because if you have genuinely eradicated the adversary's area denial capabilities, you do not post ultimatums on social media. You simply sail your fleet into the Strait of Hormuz and secure the commercial shipping lanes.
Right, you just do it.
Exactly. But the fact that the U.S. Navy is not doing that, and the fact that the administration is simultaneously asking NATO and China, of all places, to intervene and secure the strait, it paints a picture not of strategic dominance, but of immense, unmanageable pressure.
The panic.
It is panic. They are loudly claiming they don't even need the oil, yet the diplomatic scrambling tells a completely different story. The narrative of total surgical victory is colliding violently with the reality of an ongoing, economically devastating war of attrition.
And that pressure isn't just international. It is violently spilling over into domestic policy in a way that feels totally disconnected until you look closer.
Oh, the ICE thing.
Yes. In a parallel thread on the same day, Trump threatened to deploy ICE agents, immigration and customs enforcement to U.S. airports to arrest undocumented immigrants.
Which is wild.
But he was highly, highly specific. He targeted Somali individuals in Minnesota, directly calling out Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz, and he blamed the Democratic Party for a lack of TSA funding.
Right.
I'm looking at this and thinking, what on earth does domestic airport security in Minneapolis have to do with a naval blockade in the Middle East?
Well, it reveals the psychology of a leadership structure that feels totally cornered and is lashing out across all available fronts to generate leverage.
Just throwing everything at the wall.
Yeah. When you analyze the strategic coherence of the messaging, as Daniel Davis pointed out, these are not the disciplined actions of a calm, rational actor who has confidently secured a military victory.
No.
By tying domestic immigration disputes and TSA funding to an international crisis, the administration is trying to manufacture internal political leverage to offset their external military frustration.
It's incredibly chaotic.
It is chaotic communication.
Yeah.
And the most dangerous part of chaotic communication is that it rarely has the desired chilling effect on the enemy.
And we saw proof of that instantly. The response from Iran wasn't a de-escalation. It was an escalation of their own.
Right.
We have the official statement from the spokesman for the central headquarters of Hazat Qatam. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps warned that any strike on Iranian energy infrastructure would trigger the immediate reciprocal destruction of U.S. and allied desalination plants and energy grids across the entire Gulf region.
And to understand the gravity of that threat, you really have to understand the underlying mechanics of geography and water survival in the Middle East.
Okay, break that down for us.
So Iran is a massive, highly mountainous country. They have natural aquifers, rivers, internal water resources. They can survive, albeit painfully, if their coastal infrastructure takes a hit.
They have a buffer.
Exactly. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, do not possess that geographic luxury. Their entire modern existence relies on reverse osmosis desalination plants.
Which are huge targets.
Massive targets. These are incredibly fragile, multi-billion-dollar industrial facilities with massive intake pipes pulling seawater in to be purified. They are the sole lifeline of life-sustaining water for tens of millions of people.
So Iran is essentially saying, if you plunge our cities into darkness, we will plunge your regional allies back into an unlivable desert.
Precisely. It is a terrifying, modernized version of mutually assured destruction. But instead of trading nuclear warheads, they are threatening to trade the basic molecules required for human life, water, and electricity.
Wow. Which brings us to the ground truth of Operation Epic Fury. Because the rhetoric we just analyzed is completely divorced from the hard data of the kinetic campaign.
Oh, the numbers are wild.
Let me read these numbers because they are staggering. According to U.S. Central Command Chief Admiral Brad Cooper and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane, over 8,000 targets have been struck inside Iran.
8,000?
And 7,000 of those targets have been hit just since February 28th. The financial burn rate is historic. The first 6 days of this operation alone cost $11.3 billion.
In 6 days?
Yeah. And now the Pentagon is formally requesting an additional $200 billion from Congress to sustain the effort. I just want to pause on that number for a second. $200 billion.
It's hard to even conceptualize that much money.
You are talking about a supplemental request that exceeds the entire annual military budgets of most developed nations combined just for a few more weeks of bombing.
And remember, this was sold to the public as a quick surgical decapitation strike. It was supposed to be a matter of days.
Right.
But the friction of war, the mathematical reality of sustaining a high-intensity air campaign over a landmass the size of Iran is causing an economic hemorrhage.
But looking at the numbers, if you drop ordnance on 8,000 targets, you would assume the adversary is neutralized. Yet Iran is hitting back with devastating precision.
Yeah, they are.
According to the analysis by Larry Johnson, Iran has successfully targeted and destroyed 10 highly advanced U.S. radar systems. We are talking about assets valued at over $500 million each.
Unbelievable.
They have severely damaged the U.S. Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain, and they have forced the U.S. military to physically relocate personnel and aircraft away from the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, pushing them further west just to get out of the immediate danger zone.
Let's talk about the mechanics of those radar losses. Because a $500 million early warning radar isn't just some spinning dish on a tower.
Right, it's not like an airport radar.
Exactly. These are massive phased array systems that require immense power and cooling infrastructure. They're the eyes of the fleet and the air defense network.
Okay.
When Larry Johnson reports that 10 of these systems have been destroyed, it means the U.S. umbrella of situational awareness is being systematically blinded. You don't hit 10 distinct, heavily defended radar sites by getting lucky with a few cheap drones.
Right, and that ties directly into what the IRGC is calling Wave 67. They struck the Ali Al base, those U.S. radar sites,
Yeah.
and the Al Dhafra base in the UAE.
Yeah.
And the intelligence shows they utilized a complex mix of precision-guided systems, the Qatar, the KBAR Shakan, the Qiyam, and the Zulfiqar. What stood out to me in the data is the specific mention of both solid and liquid fuel systems being used simultaneously.
That is a crucial detail.
Why does that technical detail matter so much?
It matters immensely from an intelligence and targeting perspective. See, liquid fuel missiles take hours to prep.
Okay.
You have to roll them out, stand them up, and pump highly volatile corrosive fuel into them before launch. That makes them incredibly vulnerable to satellite detection and preemptive strikes.
So the U.S. can see them coming a mile away.
Exactly. Solid fuel missiles, on the other hand, are essentially prepackaged. They can be rolled out of a mountain tunnel and fired in minutes. It's a true launch-on-warning capability.
Wow.
The fact that Iran successfully coordinated a massive strike using both vulnerable liquid fuel systems and rapid solid fuel systems in Wave 67 proves unequivocally that the U.S. has not obliterated their launch capabilities or their command and control networks.
And the optics of the naval movements are reflecting that reality. The IRGC openly mocked the withdrawal of the USS Gerald R. Ford.
Oh, yeah, they had a field day with that.
I mean, this is a $13 billion aircraft carrier. It is the absolute crown jewel of the American Navy, packed with thousands of sailors and the most advanced strike fighters on Earth. It had to retreat toward Crete to avoid the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Right.
Meanwhile, the USS Abraham Lincoln is essentially parked far away in the Indian Ocean. The IRGC released statements asking why a ship of that magnitude is afraid of a few thousand speedboats, framing it as a symbol of internal collapse.
Well, look, whether the Ford is retreating due to threat assessments or simply rotating out for scheduled maintenance, the information war is being won by Iran in that specific moment.
Yeah, the optics are terrible.
Exactly. When you are operating a carrier strike group in a narrow, constrained waterway like the Bab el-Mandeb or the Strait of Hormuz, all of your blue water advantages disappear.
Because it's too tight.
Yeah, you are vulnerable to asymmetric swarm tactics, hundreds of explosive-laden speedboats, low-flying cruise missiles, and sea mines. A $13 billion carrier is not designed to fight a knife fight in a phone booth.
That's a great way to put it.
But the most alarming technological revelation of this entire campaign isn't what is happening in the narrow straits. It's what happened in the deep ocean.
Yes, let's talk about the Diego Garcia strike, because this is the 4,000-kilometer nightmare scenario we brought up at the start.
This is the big one.
Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at the joint U.S.-UK military base on Diego Garcia. According to analyst Kareem from The Cradle, the U.S. confirmed that one of these missiles was intercepted by an SM-3 missile from a Navy destroyer, and the other reportedly failed in flight.
Right.
Now, the administration is focusing on the fact that the base wasn't actually destroyed. But the success of the intercept isn't the point, is it?
Not at all. The range is the point. Diego Garcia is an atoll in the central Indian Ocean. It is the vital logistical hub for bomber deployments and naval resupply, precisely because it was believed to be mathematically out of range of any Middle Eastern threat.
They thought it was a safe zone.
Exactly. Western intelligence did not publicly assess that Iran possessed an intermediate-range ballistic missile capable of traveling 4,000 kilometers with terminal guidance. It represents an intelligence failure of staggering proportions.
It's mind-blowing.
If you can range Diego Garcia, you can range London. You can range Paris. It changes the entire calculus of force deployment because the safe havens where you part your bombers and repair your ships are suddenly in the line of fire.
And when you mentioned the SM-3 intercept, the mechanics of that are fascinating, too. We aren't talking about a simple explosion knocking a missile off course, right?
Exactly. An SM-3, or Standard Missile-3, doesn't use an explosive warhead. It uses a kinetic kill vehicle.
Wait, what does that mean?
It literally has to hit a bullet with a bullet in the vacuum of space, traveling at thousands of miles per hour, simply through the sheer force of impact.
That's insane.
It is a technological marvel, but it is also finite. Navy destroyers only carry a certain number of these interceptors in their vertical launch tubes, and they cannot easily reload them at sea.
And the intelligence failures don't stop at the ballistic missiles. I am looking at the reports regarding the air campaign, and I really need you to explain this to me. If the administration claims Iran's defense systems are obliterated, how do you explain an Israeli F-35, a fifth-generation stealth fighter getting shot down, or at the very least heavily damaged, inside Iranian airspace?
Yeah, that was a shockwave.
And reportedly an F-16 was hit as well. Analyst Pepe Escobar points out that this is the first time in human history an invisible F-35 has been successfully targeted. How are legacy Iranian systems seeing an invisible plane that costs over $100 million?
Well, let's clarify the mechanics of stealth, because invisible is a marketing term. Stealth technology doesn't make an aircraft vanish. It drastically shrinks its radar cross-section.
Okay.
It deflects radar waves away from the receiver so that a massive fighter jet looks like a bumblebee on a radar screen. But stealth is usually optimized against specific types of radar, namely the high-frequency X-band radars used by fighter jets and targeting missiles.
So there's a loophole.
Exactly. The analysis here points to heavy assistance from major geopolitical players. Analyst Alexander Mercouris reported highly credible rumors that Russian S-400 air defense systems might be actively operating in northeastern Iran.
And how does an S-400 defeat the stealth?
The S-400 utilizes multiple radar arrays operating on different frequencies, including low-frequency VHF and L-band radars. These low-frequency waves are physically larger and can actually resonate with the physical structure of stealth aircraft, like the wings, the tail fins.
So they can see the shape.
Well, they can't give you a precise enough track to shoot a missile on their own, but they tell you the F-35's in the area.
Right.
Once you know it's there, you can network that data. Combine that with what Pepe Escobar suggests, that China is providing 247 high-tech, low-Earth orbit satellite intelligence directly to Tehran, and you have an entirely new battlefield.
They aren't fighting alone.
No. Iran isn't fighting blind with 1980s technology. They are tapping directly into the sensor networks of superpowers to cue their own interceptors.
The economics of this attrition are just mind-blowing. We have analyst Willie OAM pointing out the sheer absurdity of the U.S. strike logistics right now.
The logistics are a nightmare.
Because Diego Garcia and regional bases are under threat, the U.S. is flying B-52 bombers all the way from RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
They're flying these massive bombers across Europe and the Middle East to drop JASS cruise missiles that cost $26 million apiece just to strike targets in Iran.
It is the absolute definition of an unsustainable war of attrition. Think of the mechanics of that single sortie.
Yeah.
You have hours of flight time, multiple aerial refuelings requiring massive tanker aircraft, all to launch a $26 million precision asset to destroy a drone assembly shed or a launch pad that cost a fraction of that to build.
It's just bad math.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine using a solid gold sledgehammer to swat a mosquito. Yes, you will kill the mosquito, but eventually you run out of gold before they run out of mosquitoes.
That's a perfect analogy.
It is an economic death spiral for the attacking force. Every time the Iron Dome fires a Tamir interceptor or a destroyer launches an SM-3, millions of dollars evaporate. Iran is fighting an asymmetric war not just with explosives, but with spreadsheets. They are methodically bankrupting the defense industrial base of their adversaries.
The spreadsheet warfare is one thing, but the targeting parameters are taking a terrifying turn. We have to talk about the strikes on nuclear facilities.
This is where things get genuinely existential.
Up until now, we've been discussing radar arrays and air bases. But we have hard data confirming that Israel struck Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment facility for the second time.
Right.
And even more shockingly, they dropped a bomb that left a crater just 350 meters from the operating reactor at the Bushehr nuclear power plant. I want to be very clear about the personnel on the ground there. This is a facility heavily staffed by Russian engineers from their state nuclear corporation, Rosatom.
The margin of error we are looking at here is terrifyingly thin.
350 meters is nothing for a bomb.
Nothing. Let's look at the underlying mechanics of a nuclear reactor like Bushehr. You have the reactor core, the primary coolant loops, and the massive concrete containment dome designed to withstand an airplane crash.
Right.
A near miss at an airfield is just a miss. You patch the tarmac with quick-dry cement and you fly the next day. A near miss 350 meters from an active nuclear reactor is flirting with a multi-generational catastrophe.
Because of the shockwave.
Exactly. Even if the bomb doesn't hit the dome directly, the seismic shockwave from a bunker buster can sever the external coolant lines or destroy the backup diesel generators. If you lose the ability to pump water through that core, it melts down.
Wow.
You aren't just affecting the war effort, you are irradiating an entire geographic region for centuries. The international norms that are supposed to protect nuclear sites, the IAEA frameworks, they are evaporating in real time.
And Iran's retaliation was unprecedented. They didn't just issue a diplomatic protest, they launched a direct kinetic missile strike on Dimona.
Yes, they did.
That is the southern Israeli city that houses the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center. This is the absolute core of Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program.
Exactly. And analyst Malcolm Nance provided a very sobering assessment of the mechanics of this specific strike. He suggests that the Dimona strike was a highly calculated warning from Iran.
A warning.
Yes. They didn't hit the reactor itself, they hit the town adjacent to it. The message being sent through the telemetry of that missile is unmistakable. We have the precision to reach your most sensitive existential sites if you continue targeting ours. We are moving our crosshairs from your airfields directly to your nuclear core.
It is heavy.
It is geopolitical signaling of the most dangerous kind, played with ballistic missiles.
And the human toll of this signaling is becoming impossible to ignore. In the Dimona strike alone, 20 people were injured, including a 10-year-old boy and a 40-year-old woman.
It's awful.
And these strikes are getting through the defense nets with alarming frequency. Iranian cluster bomblets hit the city of Rishon LeZion, severely damaging a daycare center. Another massive strike hit Irad, leaving 84 people wounded and 15 dead, including an elderly couple in Ramat Gan.
Yeah.
I am looking at the timeline, and we are talking about 4 distinct air raid alerts across Tel Aviv in a single morning. We always hear about the Iron Dome and David Sling being impenetrable. How are these casualties happening?
It comes down to the mechanics of a saturation attack.
Okay, explain that.
The Iron Dome is an incredibly sophisticated system. It uses radar to track incoming rockets, calculates their trajectory, ignores the ones heading for empty fields, and fires interceptors at the ones heading for populated areas.
Right, it triages them.
But the system has a mathematical limit. If an Iron Dome battery has 20 interceptors loaded and the adversary fires 40 rockets simultaneously at that specific sector, 20 rockets are getting through.
It's just a numbers game.
The system is simply being overwhelmed by sheer volume. When you add cluster munitions to the mix, which scatter dozens of smaller explosive submunitions over a wide area, the intercept geometry becomes almost impossible to solve.
Now, I want to take a quick pause here and address you, the listener, directly.
Yeah.
We are neutrally reporting these highly charged political accusations found in our deep dive today.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are observing severe accusations of war crimes flying in both directions across the international stage. The Israeli Foreign Ministry is vehemently condemning the use of cluster munitions on civilian centers like Arad and Rishon LeZion as blatant war crimes and pure terrorism.
Right.
Conversely, Iranian state media and officials are aggressively accusing the U.S. and Israel of war crimes for targeting civilian energy infrastructure and risking nuclear fallout at the Bushehr plant.
It's important to state that.
Yeah, we are laying out these highly charged accusations purely analytically to convey the realities on the ground and track the breakdown of international law as this conflict spirals. We are not endorsing either side's viewpoint. We are looking at the consequences, and the immediate consequence is massive economic destruction.
The war is no longer contained to the battlefield. It has metastasized into the global supply chain.
Let's look at the Strait of Hormuz. We are talking about a waterway that handles a staggering 20% of total global oil demand. It is now effectively closed to Western shipping.
Closed.
The panic this has caused in Washington has resulted in unprecedented financial maneuvers. The U.S. Treasury, under Secretary Scott Bessent, had to execute what he publicly called a break-the-glass emergency plan.
This part is just crazy.
Let me explain the mechanics of what he actually did, because it is wild. The Treasury Department literally lifted sanctions on 130 million barrels of Russian oil and 140 million barrels of Iranian oil that were currently sitting out at sea on tanker ships. They did this just to temporarily flood the global market and suppress domestic gas prices in America. Let me challenge the logic here again. Are we actively unsanctioning the enemy's oil, allowing them to profit, to save our own economy from a war we are fighting against them?
The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. As analyst Reza Karo pointed out, you are essentially funding the adversary you are actively trying to destroy because you mathematically cannot survive the economic shockwave of the blockade.
Wow.
The U.S. government realized that if gas hits $10 a gallon domestically, the political system fractures. So they have to allow Iranian and Russian oil to flow into the market to stabilize the price, directly enriching the war chests of Tehran and Moscow.
And even with that emergency measure, look at the global data from Reza Karo's analysis. Brent crude spiked 40% to over $110 a barrel. Dubai oil hit an eye-watering $170 a barrel.
$170 is catastrophic.
If you're listening to this and filling up your gas tank today, you're probably wondering why unsanctioning that oil hasn't brought the price down. It's because the downstream effects are immediate and global.
Yeah.
The Philippines has been forced by their government to move to a mandatory 4-day work week just to conserve national fuel reserves. Pakistan has physically closed schools and moved universities entirely online to ration electricity and energy. This isn't just a shipping disruption, it's a structural shock to the global economy.
And Iran has figured out how to brilliantly monetize this exact bottleneck.
Which is fascinating.
According to the reporting by analyst Mario Nawfal and analyst Jimmy Dore, Iran hasn't just laid sea mines and closed the strait, they have effectively set up a geopolitical toll booth.
A toll booth.
They are reportedly charging a $2 million transit fee per voyage for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. With over 3,200 commercial ships currently waiting at anchor to cross, you are looking at billions of dollars in revenue.
But how are they collecting that? I mean, they are logged out of the SWIFT banking system. A shipping company can't just wire $2 million to the IRGC.
Exactly, which is why they are demanding payment in physical cash pallets, direct commodity barter, or cryptocurrency.
Crypto.
Yes, they are forcing global shipping conglomerates to completely bypass the US dollar financial system and the Western correspondent banking network. Every ship that pays that crypto toll is a nail in the coffin of dollar hegemony, and the US military is forced to watch it happen helplessly because the infrastructure in the Gulf is made of glass.
Let's unpack that infrastructure vulnerability, because the tit-for-tat strikes are targeting the very facilities that keep the lights on globally.
Right.
Israel executed a strike on Iran's South Pars gas field, which is the largest natural gas field in the world. Within hours, Iran retaliated by striking Qatar's Ras Laffan facility.
Yeah, that was huge.
They destroyed 17% of Qatar's liquefied natural gas capacity in one single blow. Analyst Bashar al-Hali made it very clear in his assessment, this is an unprecedented destruction event. He noted it is far worse than the 2019 Abqaiq attack on Saudi oil facilities. Why is an LNG terminal so much harder to fix than an oil refinery?
It comes down to the extreme physics of liquefied natural gas. To transport natural gas on a ship, you have to cool it down to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit so it condenses into a liquid.
Okay.
The facilities that do this, the cryogenic heat exchangers, the specialized insulated piping, the massive compression turbines, they are bespoke feats of engineering. You cannot just order replacement parts from a catalog.
They're custom made.
They are custom built over years. When a missile shatters a cryogenic freezing train at Ras Laffan, you don't patch it. You have to rebuild it from scratch. You are permanently removing that capacity from the global grid for years, not weeks.
Despite this fragility, I am seeing persistent rumors circulating in defense circles that the Pentagon is actively planning an amphibious assault on Kharg Island.
I saw those rumors too.
For context, Kharg Island is Iran's main oil export terminal in the Gulf. The rumor is they plan to use a Marine Expeditionary Unit of about 5,000 Marines to seize it.
Right.
Let me play devil's advocate here. Wouldn't putting 5,000 Marines on that island at least blind Iran's radar capabilities in that specific corridor? How can seizing their main export terminal not give the U.S. massive leverage?
Well, it sounds good on paper until you look at the mechanics of anti-accessoria denial, or A2AD.
Okay.
Taking a small island does absolutely nothing to secure a 21-kilometer wide strait. Yes, your Marines might physically stand on the dirt of Kharg Island, but the water surrounding it are still entirely vulnerable to asymmetric drone swarms, anti-ship cruise missiles fired from deep within the mountainous Iranian mainland, and thousands of sea mines.
So they're just sitting ducks.
To supply those 5,000 Marines, you have to sail vulnerable supply ships into that exact kill zone every single week. It would be a catastrophic strategic trap, effectively placing thousands of American troops in a shooting gallery without addressing the core threat to commercial shipping.
And the timeline for resolving this energy crisis is critical, not just for gas prices today, but for the technological dominance of tomorrow.
Right, the AI angle.
Analyst Buzz Patterson brought up a fascinating point that connects the Strait of Hormuz to Silicon Valley. He argues that whoever controls cheap energy controls the future of advanced computing, specifically the artificial intelligence arms race.
It is the hidden dimension of this entire conflict. Training next-generation AI models requires gargantuan, almost unfathomable amounts of electricity to power the data centers and cooling systems.
It takes so much power.
The AI race is fundamentally an energy race. Therefore, the Strait of Hormuz isn't just an oil transit route for cars. It is the ultimate geopolitical prize for controlling the technological future of the 21st century.
Wow.
If the West loses access to cheap Gulf energy, the cost of training their AI models skyrockets. Meanwhile, China's access to that exact same energy remains unimpeded due to their long-term strategic and financial agreements with Iran.
Which seamlessly transitions us into the massive geopolitical realignment happening right under our noses. While Washington is panicking about AI and oil, the rest of the world is aggressively adapting.
They are moving on.
Trump is visibly furious about the lack of allied support. He took to Truth Social to blast NATO, calling the alliance a paper tiger and labeling European allies as cowards for not sending their navies into the Strait of Hormuz to clear the mines and escort the ships.
But there is a strict legal and political reality that his rhetoric completely ignores. Analyst Willia OAM expertly explained the mechanics of NATO's Article 6.
Article 6, not 5.
Right. Most people are familiar with Article 5, the principle that an attack on one member is an attack on all. But Article 6 strictly limits the geographic area where that mutual defense clause applies.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it only covers territories and forces north of the Tropic of Cancer. The Middle East, the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, they are explicitly legally excluded from NATO's mutual defense umbrella.
So they literally don't have to help.
Exactly. European allies are deliberately leaning on this legal technicality to avoid getting sucked into a devastating theater. They are watching the U.S. expend its wealth, deplete its interceptor stockpiles, and isolate itself, and they are firmly saying, this is not our war.
Meanwhile, the global south is forging its own path entirely, accelerating systems they have been building for years. Analyst Anastasia from the Think BRICS platform laid out some truly mind-bending statistics.
Oh, the trade numbers?
Yes, India and Russia just settled a record $68.7 billion in bilateral trade. And the vital detail here is that they did it using rupees and rubles. They bypassed the US dollar completely. How are they physically doing that without touching the Western banking system?
It involves the mechanics of de-dollarization through what are called Vostro and Nostro accounts.
Okay, where are those?
Instead of India sending dollars through a Western correspondent bank connected to SWIFT, an Indian bank opens a rupee account within a Russian bank and vice versa. They essentially hold each other's currencies directly and balance their trade ledgers internally.
Like a private ledger.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the Western media chronically misinterprets this dynamic. When BRICS nations have friction like India carefully managing its delicate relations with both Washington and Moscow, the West eagerly labels it a fracture.
Right, they say BRICS is falling apart.
But Anastasia from Think BRICS explores how this gap in consensus is actually a sign of mature sovereign diplomacy. BRICS isn't built on the strict, punitive compliance demanded by the U.S. within NATO or the G7. It's built on managing friction among genuine equals. It's a completely different architecture of global power, and it is proving highly resilient.
And we are seeing that alternative architecture deliver real-world, life-saving results. Cuba is currently suffering from nationwide catastrophic power grid blackouts.
Yeah.
The U.S. sanctions prevent Western aid. So the Russian tanker Anatoly Kolodkin simply loads up, sails straight across the Atlantic, and delivers 730,000 barrels of crude oil to Cuba, breaking the isolation and turning the lights back on.
And look at the diplomatic shifts in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim-majority democracy. Their president, Prabowo Subianto, who is a retired combat general, by the way, publicly and formally suspended Indonesia's participation in the U.S.-led Board of Peace.
Wow.
He called the military campaign against Iran completely irrational. When a highly decorated combat general from a massive strategic ally tells the world that your bombing campaign makes zero strategic sense, you have entirely lost the geopolitical narrative.
The loyalties are shifting even among America's closest Gulf allies. Analysts Mohammad Marandi and Danny Haifong have been closely tracking the internal socio-political pressures building within the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan.
The domestic pressure there is immense.
The civilian populations in these countries are absolutely outraged at their royal families and governments for allowing U.S. military bases on their sovereign soil to be used to launch bombing runs against Iran.
It creates an existential internal threat for these monarchies. If they continue to support the U.S. campaign and allow their airspace to be used, they risk massive popular uprisings and internal instability.
What if they don't?
If they expel the U.S. forces, they lose their historical security umbrella. They are trapped between the intense anger of their own citizens and the relentless strategic demands of Washington.
We have to ask the ultimate question here.
Yeah.
Why is this happening? What is the core ideological engine driving this conflict past the point of strategic rationality? And again, I want to reiterate to you, our listeners, we are neutrally reporting the divergent realities and political viewpoints driving the conflict. We are not taking a side.
Definitely.
Let's begin with the analysis from Rula Jibril. She points out a fundamental disconnect. Israeli strategic goals and American strategic goals are fundamentally divergent in this specific conflict. The U.S. ostensibly wants regional stability, the containment of the conflict, and the free flow of oil.
Right, a quick resolution.
But Jibril highlights that powerful elements within the Israeli administration are influenced by Kahanism and the structural foundation of the 2018 nation-state law.
She suggests that the current administration desires what is ideologically termed a greater Israel, which fundamentally relies on having perpetually destabilized neighbors. Essentially, it is a forever war model where surrounding nations are constantly degraded into failed states, thereby ensuring Israel remains the sole, unchallenged, dominant regional military power.
And this directly conflicts with the American desire for a swift, decisive victory and a return to the economic status quo. Furthermore, there is a massive gap between the public rhetoric we hear and the internal intelligence assessment.
The gap is huge.
You have officials constantly claiming the Iranian regime is on the brink of collapse, suggesting that if we just drop a few more bombs, the people will rise up and overthrow the Ayatollahs.
But the internal memos say the exact opposite. The Young Turks reported on a leaked Washington Post cable that originated directly from the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem.
Okay, what did it say?
It confirmed that the actual classified Israeli intelligence assessment is that the Iranian regime is not cracking under the pressure. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps retains absolute superiority and the upper hand domestically. The idea that a kinetic bombing campaign will spark a democratic revolution is an absolute intelligence fantasy.
Now, I want to balance this by bringing up the competing perspective, which is that Israel views its actions purely through the lens of self-defense against existential threats. From their perspective, Iran has been funding, training, and arming proxy armies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, for decades.
The ring of fire.
Exactly. They view this as a ring of fire designed to slowly strangle the state, culminating in the horrific events of October 7th. They argue that border security and the very survival of their nation necessitate the preemptive dismantling of Iran's nuclear and ballistic capabilities before a second Holocaust can occur.
Which brings us to the most critical philosophical question of modern warfare. Can you bomb an ideology out of existence?
That's the ultimate question.
If we look at the renowned Israeli documentary, The Gatekeepers, which features unprecedented interviews with 6 former heads of the Shin Bet Israel's internal security service, the consensus among these battle-hardened intelligence chiefs is a resounding no.
No, you can't.
You can't. Kinetic action, dropping bunker busters on cities, often perversely strengthens the underlying ideology. It creates martyrs, it solidifies domestic resistance against a common enemy, and it ensures that the next generation is born into a crucible of hatred, guaranteeing the conflict continues for another 50 years.
So you have two immovable realities grinding against each other. One views the strikes as an aggressive expansionist campaign designed to permanently cripple neighbors, pointing to the immense civilian toll. The other views the exact same strikes as a desperate, necessary defense against a regime that openly calls for its eradication. And the entire global economy is caught in the middle of this ideological collision.
As we bring this analysis to a close, we need to circle back to the geometry of this new world. The one crucial takeaway you must remember for the rest of this week is this. The illusion of a quick, surgical, consequence-free war has been irrevocably shattered.
Completely shattered.
When you see the operational use of a 4,000-kilometer ballistic missile striking near Diego Garcia and the weaponization of the global energy supply chain through a $2 million crypto toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz, you are witnessing history. This is no longer a regional dispute over borders. It is a structural realignment of global power. We have learned the hard way that possessing overwhelming military dominance does not guarantee economic security in a deeply interconnected world.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you watch the markets this week. If the United States and the West are forced to permanently bypass the Strait of Hormuz because the insurance markets have collapsed and the military risks are simply too high, will this ultimately accelerate the global transition away from fossil fuels?
That's a profound thought.
Could the sheer necessity of surviving this crippling energy blockade inadvertently force the rapid, massive adoption of alternative energy infrastructure, solving the climate crisis not through careful diplomacy, but through the desperate crucible of war?
It is a profound paradox. The very war fought over the control of oil could end up being the definitive catalyst that ends the era of oil entirely.
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.